Welcome to For the Church, a podcast for the flock of Zion Presbyterian Church in Columbia, Tennessee. We want to help you think biblically about everyday matters. Zion Church exists to join Jesus in his mission to reach people with the gospel and then equip his people to worship and to serve. I'm your host, Keaton Paul, and joining me is my regular conversation partner and co-host, Seth Scruggs. So we're about to enter into a whole new season of For the Church, and I'm super excited. But before we do that, hey Seth, how are you?
I'm so good. I'm so excited.
So excited. It's been, it's been a really long time since the last time we talked.
We're recording 2 episodes today because we're trying to double up and get some episodes in before my wife has our baby.
Yeah.
And so
you will partake of that too.
But I'm not I'm not having the baby.
You're not having the baby. You will physically be there.
Yes.
And
physically not be sleeping very well.
So
we're trying to get as many of these in before the sleep deprivation really hits, because
yes.
I don't know that hosting a podcast is gonna be like sleep deprivation and talking. Clearly, I'm already loopy, but sleep deprivation and talking just not conducive.
No. And for, your own sake and your wife's sake, you don't tell your, freshly postpartum wife, hey babe,
I'm gonna go.
Yeah, you got this for a minute. I'm gonna go record a podcast real quick.
I'm gonna go drink coffee and talk to my friend.
That's a great way to die.
Yep.
So anyway, what are we doing, Seth?
We're spending the summer at the movies.
Keaton. The movies.
So we've talked about doing this, I think, since last fall.
Yeah.
When Keaton asked me if I would help him co-host this podcast, I said yes, but I want to do an entire series on movies and culture and arts.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, even though Keaton does not like movies.
I mean, that's kind of true. I feel like I'm not, this is going to sound super stupid. I feel like I'm not very good at watching movies.
Well, that's what this is for.
And that's what this is for. That's right.
So let's zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
Why are we doing at the movies? Right. So that's like
yes.
the big question. So a lot of churches,
yes,
especially a lot of non-denominational megachurches, right? So thinking churches that are very talking centric.
Yeah.
And I use that particularly. They're very typically centered on the personality of the pastor.
Yeah.
We'll do what they call at the movies, right? And in the at the movies thing, I genuinely believe the heart of it is good, right? We want to take what people are experiencing in the world, and we want to talk about the biblical echoes and gospel echoes that are happening through that.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a lot about that this season, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
But we don't do that at Zion.
No.
And we talked about this before.
Yeah.
We talked about it a little bit in the last episode.
Yeah.
Where we talked about what does it mean to be preaching, right?
Yeah.
What is the Sunday service for?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we landed on, and by we, I mean the Westminster Divines.
Yeah.
Landed on what preaching is. You look like you want to give a definition of preaching real quick.
Yeah, preaching is it is the heralding. It's intentional. The heralding of the good news as found in the whole counsel of God, which is the Bible.
So the reason that we're doing this podcast is because we land on the side that doing a sermon based on a movie or even based on themes in a movie is not really what the Sunday sermon is for. And that's really where we're landing on this, right?
Yeah, that's
not
exactly
that necessarily that's bad.
Right.
Usually, in the better of the circumstances, those sermons are still biblical, but would be considered topical, not expository.
Right.
And we land on preaching should be expository.
Yeah. It should be textually derived.
And then on the more extreme side, the sermons are not really biblical at all. So what we want to do in this is this is the kind of perfect space, we think, to really have these conversations, because we can have a biblically grounded, broad conversation.
Right.
And I'm using that word in particular because this is a conversation between us and you listening, where you can kind of chime in and we can kind of all experience this and talk about it together.
That's right. Yeah. And there's a good precedent for doing this in the correct space.
Right.
So, you don't have to be around me very long, or in the Zion sphere very long to know who is like one of Keaton's dudes. One of Keaton's dudes is Francis Schaeffer.
Absolutely.
Keaton loves Francis Schaeffer, and I do. And, again, Schaeffer was no friend to consumeristic Christianity by any stretch of the imagination. Regularly, though, what he would do is gather together a group of atheist college kids and would sit down and watch a very technical movie from Bergman or something like that. And they would sit and watch a movie together on like a Friday night. This was like the 60s and 70s, so they're all, hippies and barefoot. Schaefer wasn't a hippie, but, they're all sitting there. Yeah. he had a goatee and long hair. But, sitting crisscross applesauce on the floor watching this, Bergman film. They would watch it together, and then he would take the next 3 hours to discuss it and then give, Q&A, all the while interlacing both the gospel themes and the anti-gospel themes that ran throughout. And, one thing that I've learned from, now, strangely enough, years of working with students is this is a skill that whenever my kids catch it, right, and they're able to discern biblical gospel themes or biblical and anti-gospel themes, light bulbs come on. And so, I've got tons of students running around now who, will listen to the latest Taylor Swift album and find gospel redemptive themes and anti-gospel themes, and watch movies, and, tons now that like love to read Jane Austen and find those themes within them. And so this is a tremendous thing, and movies are, to cite one author, are the stories we tell ourselves. And so this is such a good skill for Christians to learn, and one that I'm pretty bad at, I think.
So why I wanted to answer this question before we really jump in. Why am I allowed to talk about it?
Yes.
Because I feel like maybe people know this about me, maybe they don't.
Yeah.
I've been asked many times, like, what do you do? Because I don't understand it. I make videos. My degree is from Belhaven University in biblical studies and film production. I went for film production. I added the biblical studies later. So I work in film production. I have worked on feature films. I have worked on television shows. I have worked on big crews, small crews, Pizza Hut commercials, basically everything, that you can imagine, social stuff, all of it. And then I watch a lot of movies. I've watched 60 or 70 movies this year already. We're in June. I usually watch somewhere between 150 to 170 movies a year.
Yeah.
Some of them new, some of them not. Some of them I've seen before. Some of them, I'm trying to, catch up. There's like 100 years of movie history, and I'm trying to see everything as much as I can, within reason. And I read a lot of theology. Like I read a lot of that stuff, trying to think through all of these things. And so that kind of answers that. And you kind of hinted at kind of the next thing, but like, why movies?
Yeah.
That Netflix reported in 2023 that there were almost 100 billion viewing hours.
Oh my
100
gosh.
billion viewing hours, right? So like that's how much people are watching their shows
Yeah.
and their movies. And that's just Netflix.
Yeah.
So, and that's worldwide. So everyone's watching these things. And we're a story-driven people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we connect with stories, whether it's how we talk to each other. When we talk to each other, we're telling stories, usually.
Yeah.
Usually, it's not just like someone pontificating about whatever. Usually, you tell a story if you want to make a point, right?
Yeah.
And God gave us stories. A little bit of a hat tip to Richard Pratt there.
There you go.
But
yep.
what is Scripture, right? But a story. So God could have given us, here's a list of everything you need to know.
Yeah.
And this is why, have you ever heard the, what does the Bible stand for? Basic instructions before leaving Earth. I hate that.
Yeah.
Because it completely undermines what Scripture does and what Scripture is.
Yeah.
And it's a really good way to come to Scripture with the wrong understanding. And I think that's why a lot of people ultimately leave the faith. And that's a rabbit trail for another time. But think about story, right?
Yeah,
Like think about the stories in Scripture. That I always go to the example where David is running from Saul, right? And he's in this cave, and Saul comes in to relieve himself, and David has this moment where he can kill Saul, and he has his sword drawn, and he is ready to kill Saul, and then he decides not to, and that's not written out as a description of like, don't kill people.
Right.
It doesn't even tell us whether or not we should kill people, because one might, there's plenty of space to argue in that story that he could have and maybe should have. Yeah. But it shows us something about his character. It shows us something about God's character, because David is a man after God's own heart, right? Yeah. But through that story, through that dramatic tension, we learn way more about who God is, about what God wants from us. Yeah. And obviously this is an inspired story, so it's different than the stories that we tell each other. Yeah. But the stories that we tell each other matter. Right. Yep, totally. And then, movies both make the culture and speak to what is important about the culture. Totally. So I think that there's this idea that we either should or shouldn't watch movies, depending on who you are, or we should or shouldn't listen to certain music, or we should or shouldn't listen to or watch certain shows, or read certain books, or fill in the blank, right? Because that thing is going to influence us. Yeah. And that's not true. Yeah, right. Good. Well,
and so that's why we should only watch VeggieTales, right?
Exactly. And that's why everything we're going to talk about is VeggieTales.
It's only VeggieTales, okay? So here we go.
Yeah, so you said this one time, and I'm going to quote you back to you.
Oh no!
But you described. I was asking you about why you watched all this trashy TV, because you were telling me about watching like Outer Banks or The Summer I Turned Pretty or something like that.
I plead the fifth on all of those things. I never have said that I've watched those, so far as you know. No, sorry. Go ahead.
But what you said, and what I think is incredibly important, is that you were trying to keep up with what the students were watching. Yeah. Because you wanted to see what stories they were finding compelling.
That's right.
And then how you could meet that with the gospel as a more compelling story. Yeah. But what's key in that is that it's the stories that they find compelling.
That's exactly right.
So most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time when we are coming to stories, and I'm going to use movies because that's kind of what we're keeping our range to, because it's a lot easier to talk about a 2-hour movie than a 15-hour TV show. Yeah. When we come to these movies, it's not that we're looking to be told something. It's that we're looking to connect with something. Yeah. Yeah, right? For sure. Like we're already in a place to say, I want to connect with something. And usually the movies that become popular are not popular because they are making the culture. Yeah. Though there are certainly places where there are ideas that are being embedded and those kinds of things, and we'll talk about that. But usually it's because it hit on something that the audience already wanted.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And just to take a step further back from the philosophical, Hollywood is a business that is spending millions upon millions upon billions of dollars,
Yeah.
right, to get your attention, and they're incredibly risk averse.
Yeah.
So most of the time, if you're seeing something in a movie, it is because someone said, at the end of the day, it's safe enough to put that in that movie
Yeah.
that we can make money back.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty cynical way of saying there's something in this movie that's going to connect with people.
That's right.
Right?
That's
that
right.
someone is going to watch it
Yeah.
and want to connect with it.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's right. So on that note, I watch almost everything that students are like, have you seen such and such movie? Most of the time I go and watch it. There have been just a couple occasions that I think, heavens no, why on earth are you watching that?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times I'll go and watch those movies. Destiny Day, I'll be sitting there watching, and I'll look at her and I'm like, this is so stupid.
Right.
Like this is a terrible. Why is this compelling to anyone? And granted, a lot of the things that I find compelling in good movies are like, some of my favorite movies, like, I love Dead Poet Society. Right. Love it. Most students hate it because it's too boring. So what are you, and maybe this is the wrong place to bring this up. What kind are we going to watch a variety of movies that are going to be compelling stories in different ways for different groups?
Yeah, so that's the plan. So what I want, and that actually brings us really well into kind of our approach for this. The first is that, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specific movies that I chose for this project, but our approach is that, yes, there's a broad swath of things that our people are connecting with, right? And not everyone likes country music, not everyone likes pop music, not everyone likes certain things. So there's a pretty broad swath. I did try to pick things that my kind of criteria were the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
I think actually everything is within the last 5 or 6. Except for maybe a couple things. And generally things that made a lot of money.
Yeah. Okay.
Or won certain awards or that kind of thing. Because to your point, they're things that if a lot of people are seeing them, then that usually means that it's connecting on some level.
Yeah.
Or if it won an award, whatever you think about the Oscars, I personally probably care way too much about them, but whatever you think about those awards, that means that it's speaking to something in the culture.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That if it wins Best Picture, whether or not you think that it should have, or whether or not I think it should have, it is speaking to something in the culture that it is winning the highest award that industry can give it. So there are a couple in here that made a lot of money. There are a couple that won a bunch of awards, some things that I just thought were a little interesting. And so, I think it's a broad swath, but it is also limited to my taste. So we'll find out as we go. But one thing that we're going to try and not do with all these movies, because it is a broad swath. Yeah. What I don't want to do is shove a gospel message into every movie, because not every movie is going to have a gospel message. We're going to talk about things on the story's terms. Yeah. Right. So that's something that I think that we can really get misguided on. Right. No matter what the movie is, no matter what the story is if we come to it with our own preconceived notion, or we're trying to make it be something that it's not. Yeah. And so I think, as a Christian, from my perspective, I think every story ultimately is going to echo back to the truest story. Yeah. Which is the story that God is telling through redemptive history. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Are you familiar at all with Joseph Campbell, The Hero with 1,000 Faces?
No, I haven't read that one.
So The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell was this philosopher, and he basically concocted this idea that I think is very true, but he originated the kind of writing where he said that every story is the same story. Okay. right?
Yeah.
So every story that people tell throughout all of history,
Yeah.
and he called them myths. These myths are all the same.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
there's creation. There is something that, and he has this whole structure, and it's this whole structure that kind of follows it. But there's a person. Their world is one way. Something forces them to go out of that place.
Yeah.
Travel through all of the darkness.
Yeah.
Ultimately make the biggest sacrifice
Yeah.
to create a new world.
Yeah.
Now, what does that sound like?
Mm-hmm.
Now, for Joseph Campbell, Jesus is just another one of those myths.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I would argue, and I think that C.S. Lewis
Mm-hmm.
makes this argument kind of throughout his work as well, because he uses the word myth in a very different way than we would think of Greek myths.
Yeah. True myth.
True myth. And C.S. Lewis would pick this up too in a different way, but Jesus is the archetype of all of those stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, from a Christian perspective, I can look at that and say, actually, I think what's happening, and this is genuinely true. This is why I love stories. It's why I am in this field. It's why I do what I do. I believe that what we're actually all searching for is, you've probably heard the God-shaped hole in your heart. That's kind of a cheesy way of saying it, but we're all aware that there is some story happening. Yeah. Right? This is like Romans 1 language.
Right.
We're aware that there's something going on that is bigger than us, that is deeper than us, that is bigger than every story that we could possibly tell. Yeah. Because we're caught up in this big story.
That's right. Yeah.
And really the way that we're trying to make sense of our place in that story is echoing and repeating that story.
Yeah.
Now, we're sinful, fallen human creatures. And so even though every story structure in general, and when I learned story structure in college, we talked about this. Like this is the pattern of story. And every story screenwriting book that you'll ever read is going to have something to that effect, right? That there needs to be some sort of creation, fall, redemption, consummation, or new world, or it all kind of has the same thing. Yeah. There's the world is one way. Something happens that forces you out of that. You go on a journey to find the thing. Yeah. And ultimately you land in a new world where everything is different. Yeah. Because of what happened. Yeah. Because nothing can be the same.
Right.
It's the story that God's telling, right? And so as we're watching these movies, I want to think about, like, okay, what is compatible with the gospel in this? And how is their conclusion about this redemption? How is that redemption compatible with the gospel and not? Yeah. How is it compatible with what we experience and not? I think those are incredibly important questions to ask as we start to think about the things that we're watching. Yeah. And that brings us to kind of the next point of, like, thinking about how do you watch a movie? Yeah. And Mike Cosper in The Stories We Tell kind of talks about this. I call it leaning back or leaning in. Okay. Leaning back would be, I'm exhausted. It's been a long day. I'm going to put on something. I'm going to throw on Mission Impossible, and I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to be excited that Tom Cruise is jumping off a cliff.
That's right.
Leaning in would be, okay, I'm going to sit here almost like reading a book. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to lean in. Yeah. And I'm going to say, okay, this movie is being made intentionally. Right. And I'm interested, and I want to see what they're trying to show or expose or exhibit about the world that I'm seeing. Yeah. And kind of compare and contrast those. And there's a spectrum there. You know, sometimes you're watching a movie and
that's right.
Maybe you're leaning back and you're like, oh, what was that? And you're kind of caught up in it. And,
that's right.
And any good movie that is actually going to be a blend of the two. It should be entertaining, but there are going to be things that you're going to lean into. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Movies with both eyes open.
Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of, that's the general, approach. Okay. Right?
Great.
And now I'm going to get into my controversial hot takes here.
Oh boy.
But I'm going to start with scripture.
Okay, good. Well, that's a good place to start, I guess.
So Philippians 4:8. Everyone, I think, is familiar with this. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So a lot of times people will use this and then we'll make the poop and the brownie analogy. Are you familiar with the poop and the brownie analogy?
Yeah.
I think I've told it to you a few times.
Yeah. It's popular. Isn't it popular like in youth groups? I didn't really grow up with like a youth group.
Yeah, it's really popular in youth groups. So
because it's poop.
Because it's poop. My argument is that movies are more than the sum of their parts. So the poop and the brownie analogy is if you were going to eat a brownie and someone said, there's just a little bit of poop in there. Just like one little bit. You probably wouldn't eat any of the brownie. So if there's a movie.
That's right.
And there's one little bad thing in it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't. Why are you watching the movie?
That's right. Which is why we're only watching VeggieTales. So my argument here is that pretty much every film that you're ever going to watch, there's going to be some objectionable content. But not VeggieTales.
Not VeggieTales.
Sorry, I'll get off of VeggieTales. My bad.
Pretty much every movie that you watch is going to have some objectionable content.
Yeah.
Some character is going to make a decision that you disagree with at some point in the movie. Of every movie that you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Even the Christian movies.
Oh.
Right? And that's another thing that we'll get into.
But facing the giants.
In order for that fall to happen, right? That creation, fall, redemption, that pattern. In order for that to happen, there has to be a flaw in your character that they are trying to fix.
Christians aren't flawed, are we? Sorry. This is a weird seat for me. So
yeah, I know. You're having fun over there.
I'm having a lot of fun.
So the question is like, how much are we okay with?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's good.
And that's why I started with that scripture. Does the film ultimately push us toward what is true and just and noble? And that's what I want us to think about, right?
Yeah.
So rather than saying, well, it has this bad thing in it, or, oh, well, it has X amount of bad words, rather think, ultimately, is this something that is going to push me toward a greater love of my neighbor, toward a greater love of God, toward a better understanding of my neighbor?
Yeah.
Is it going to make me think ultimately about things that are true and just and noble? Now, I am not advocating that we just watch whatever.
Oh, that's good.
There are certain things that we just should not put in front of ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? Like just absolutely should not put in front of ourselves. And there are great resources. I recommend Common Sense Media.
Oh, yeah.
And The Parent's Guide on IMDb. I don't recommend Plugged In as much, simply because they tend to make qualitative judgments based on all of these things.
Got it.
As opposed to just laying out here's some of the objectionable content, though they can be useful as well.
Yeah.
And so I recommend like looking at those first, right?
Yeah, those are good.
Especially if there's a certain sin that like you're struggling with. I can't speak to everyone here, but if there's something you struggle with and you know this thing, I am way sensitive to this thing or that thing.
Yeah.
Steer clear of certain things.
Yeah.
That is 100% what I'm saying. I am not saying that we should just open ourselves up.
Right.
What I am saying is that we shouldn't just turn away from everything and avoid it entirely and say, well, there's no value in this simply because it may have something objectionable in it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if that one guy who makes all the Christian movies, if we can watch movies that he didn't make?
Yes. And I would argue that we should.
Oh.
For all of the above reasons, right? Like, but no, really, like, I think that that's something that people tend to struggle with, right? There's objectionable content out there. There are going to be things that we disagree with. And that we look at and we say, that's sin. Like, right? Like, that's, if we're convicted Christians, it's what we should be doing.
Right.
But ultimately, even though there is sin present, there's going to be.
Yeah.
Of course there's going to be.
Yeah.
it can lead us to thinking about our culture differently.
Yeah.
And can even, might be a little controversial, can even provoke empathy.
Oh boy.
For people who do not believe the same things that we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is necessary if we are going to attempt to lead them to Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there are good there's just massive historical precedents for that. So again, like I guess really in so many ways my two guys in church history that I always keep coming back to are Francis Schaeffer, and he did this thing all the time. But the other guy I always come back to, as you all know, Augustine, right? And Augustine cites pagan authors constantly, and he'll cite Oedipus, and he'll be talking about that and be like, oh yeah, there's this thing in here and this thing in here and this thing in here. I don't know if you've ever read Oedipus, but it's got some weird stuff in there.
Yeah,
that Augustine, who is especially later on in life is like, hey, celibacy, like always, maybe just don't get married ever because it's weird, it's bad, don't do that thing, right? Oedipus has a lot of weird sexual things in there, and and so Christians throughout the ages have taken pagan sources and been like, there are good and right themes in here, and this is the way that we engage the culture around us. That's what the prophets are doing. They're speaking simultaneously with the culture, for the culture, and against the culture, right? So they're able to push back and say, this is destructive, but I'm going to tell you that in a way that you can understand, in language you can understand, and I'm going to do it with, love, speaking the truth in love. So, this sort of posture, I think, is in so many ways really helpful just for Christians in a world that's in constant flux. Learning these skills is a way to be able to say, hey, you don't have to actually be so worried about getting caught up in the cultural current or whatever else. You really can, as a Christian, be mindful of things and discerning, while also being able to engage the culture around you. We don't take the posture, at least here, of Christians withdrawing. There's a reason why Zion Presbyterian Church is a church that wants to equip its members to worship and to serve. And one of the ways that you can serve is by sitting down and having good conversations with your neighbors. In fact, that's one of the best ways you can serve. So this is really good.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate again, there are always going to be things objectionable, and there may be something in the movies that we're going to talk about that is a stumbling block for you.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a stumbling block for anyone. I want that stated for the record.
There you go.
We will, but I do want to be able to engage in the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you to look up on the IMDb Parents Guide. That's usually really good because it is crowdsourced. So it's a lot of people kind of giving their input. It's not someone coming in and just one person's kind of sensibilities. And look at those first. But also don't let certain things scare you off. Right. So if there's some uncomfortability, I think that's a word, then lean into that maybe.
Yeah.
If it's not usually the kind of thing that you would watch, lean into that maybe.
Yeah.
So that's one way that we need to think about approaching a movie, right? So we need to approach it leaning in, being aware. There are certain things that I'm not going to agree with, right? Like there's certain positions or whatever, yes, most movies are not made by professing conservative evangelical Christians. But if we believe that we're all made in the image of God, how is this speaking, number one, to the overarching story that God is telling through redemptive history? And number two, how is it speaking to what's happening in our current cultural moment? Why a question if you were to walk into a Hollywood office to pitch a movie.
Yeah.
A question that you might be asked is why now?
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
Why this movie now?
Yeah.
And if we were to go through all of film history, there's a lot of times that you could point and say, oh, that movie's being made then because of, in World War II, we're making a lot of pro-America, really, excited about heroism.
Yeah.
Those kinds of movies.
In Casablanca, because we needed more really good catchphrases.
Yeah. And in the 70s, we're experiencing this disillusionment, from the fallout of all of these institutions in the 60s and all of this. And so you get a lot of Vietnam movies and a lot of movies about disillusionment. And so as we're thinking through these movies, and that's why I wanted to limit us to around the last 10 to 15 years, is what do these movies, why now?
Yeah.
Why are these movies being made now?
Yeah.
But let's dig in a little bit more, right? So if movies are more than the sum of their parts, that implies that there are parts of a movie.
Oh.
So what are the parts of a movie?
Well, I had to imagine there's probably there's probably a beginning, there's a middle, and then there's an end.
So one of the interesting things about filmmaking is how many layers there are to it, right?
Yeah.
So usually, if you read a book.
There's this one scene in Parks and Rec. It's probably my favorite TV series ever. So there you go. I don't know, whatever. It's not VeggieTales. Okay, so fine. There it is. But there's this one time where Ron Swanson, right, this kind of, man's man, he's talking about his favorite book, which is Moby Dick.
Yeah.
And then they're like, he's like, is it about abolition? And he's like, no, I think it's just about
fishing.
It's just about a big fish.
Yeah. So, but that's a perfect example, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of layers to a movie. When we think about a lot of works, right? The great works, when you think about those.
Yeah.
Vincent van Gogh.
Yeah.
He painted, but he painted by himself, right?
Right.
He painted. So everything that you see is directly him envisioning something and painting it.
Yeah.
Moby Dick, one guy sat down and he wrote it.
Yeah.
Hemingway wrote all these books. This is all these people. When you think of those things, they are typically one person, and we like to distill a lot of movies down to that too, right?
Yeah.
And that's not unimportant, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason that Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino, and you probably know all those names.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. They do have their own specific style, and they are artists in a way, right?
Yeah.
In their own way, I should say. But there's more in filmmaking because it requires so many technical skills. So I'm going to just run through a list.
All right.
Just really quickly.
Here we go.
There's script writing, right?
Okay.
Right?
That
So
makes
what's
sense.
the structure of the story? When, so someone just sat down and wrote the story.
Yeah.
But then you've got cinematography, which is more than just, is it a pretty image? It's where is the camera in this scene? What does the lighting look like? What color is the lighting? Is it a lot of light? Is there not a lot of light? What lens is on the camera? Does the camera move? Is it locked off? Is it high? Is it low?
Yeah.
All of that is going into the process of making every scene.
Yeah.
Actors, what do they look like? How old are they? How young are they? What do they sound like? What decisions are they making? What blocking? Where do they move in the scene? I was watching Marriage Story, the 2019 film with Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson last night. And there's a bonus feature where Noah Baumbach, the director of that film, is walking through. There's a big fight scene, not a physical fight scene, but a verbal fight scene in that movie. And he's walking through. In theory, it's a very simple scene, right?
Yeah.
It's two people having an escalating conversation.
Yeah.
But he's walking through all of his thought process behind the blocking, just the blocking.
Yeah.
Where do the actors move? When do they move? How do they move?
Yeah.
All of that is going into the scene. And then they're also, the actors themselves are contributing to what they feel like their characters would do because they're building these characters as well.
That's cool.
And cinematography, to go back just real quick, cinematography is an entire team.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Of a cinematographer who's in charge of the camera and the lighting, all the way down to the hundreds of people who are physically moving all of the lights. So it's a massive team.
Yeah.
Production design, costume design, what colors are being used? What do the sets look like? Does it look like real life? Does it not look like real life? To contrast like a marriage story, which looks very much like it took place in real life because it did, to a Wes Anderson film, where none of the sets look like they could exist in real life.
Yes, they look crazy.
What are the actors wearing? Why are they wearing it? Does it make sense with their character? Does it not make sense with their character? Is it anachronistic? Does someone dress like they're from the 50s even though it's 2024? Like all of those decisions are going in.
Yeah.
Sound, right? What do you hear? What do you not hear? Is there music in the scene? Is it in the world, like as in like is someone playing it, or is it a score? That's like an underbed of music in the thing. I think of Rear Window is a good example of this. Jimmy Stewart movie directed by Alfred Hitchcock. All of the music in that film, all of the sound takes place within the world of the film. So it's something that, in theory, the character would be hearing.
Yeah.
And that's on purpose. It puts you in the role of that character. It identifies you with that character in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
Sound is very powerful.
Yeah.
Editing. What is included in the film? How long are the scenes? How short are the scenes? How do you transition? When do you cut from one actor's face to another? Are you allowed to see the person talking, or are you seeing the reaction shot? What are you allowed to see? What are you not allowed to see? All of those decisions, and all of that funnels up to the director, right? Yeah. So that's why I say Spielberg, Scorsese, Tarantino, all these people are still important, right?
Yeah.
Because they're at the top of this and ultimately making calls.
Yeah.
The production team is bringing to them 4 options and saying, I want red on the walls and green on the actor and this and that. And
or just pink everywhere if you're watching Barbie.
Or just pink everywhere if you're watching Barbie. So all of those decisions are important.
Yeah.
Because all of that, whether or not you're thinking about it, and hopefully if filmmakers do their job right, you're not thinking about it, right? Yeah. You're not thinking about how incredible, this is, or this thing or that thing is. I think about, if you've seen the movie The Social Network.
Yeah.
The opening scene of that movie, to me, for my money, is one of the best scenes that exists. I think The Social Network is a fine example of a perfect movie.
Yeah.
Nearly perfect at the very least. But that opening scene is very simply, if you haven't seen it, Mark Zuckerberg is on a date with a woman.
Yeah.
She is talking, and they're just kind of having this back and forth, and she ultimately ends up breaking up with him.
Yeah.
And it's, 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Very simple, right? 2 characters at a table talking.
Yeah.
And if you're watching it, that may be all you see.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of choices being made as far as the rhythm of the scene, the rhythm of the editing, how when it cuts from a really tight close-up to a more medium shot to the wide shot, how much you're hearing of everything. I think it's a good example. If you want to look up that scene, I can put a link in the notes. But it's a great example because a lot of times when we think of virtuosic filmmaking, you think of these epic action sequences, and we will talk about some of those, of course. But that right there, there's so much going on under the hood, so to speak.
That's right.
That you're not thinking about, that you're not really seeing in a conscious sense, but is actually making an impact on your judgment of the scene.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, as somebody with a rather untrained eye, I'm a sucker for a good historical piece.
Yeah.
And so when the movie 1917 came out, I remember watching it and being like, dang, this is a good movie. But it feels like it's a really long movie. And then at some point I watched the thing and they're like, yeah, we filmed it so it felt like it's one take. And I was like, dang, that's why it felt like it was just like one big long journey.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a great example. That's a more on that virtuosic side where it really does, it makes a difference. Even if you're not thinking about it.
Right. I had no idea what was going on, but I'm like, man, I feel like I'm running right along with this guy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's very much on purpose. And that's a great example, I think, of a movie that it fits, right?
Yeah.
That wouldn't be the right choice for every movie. Because some movies you need to feel that rapid cutting and quickly moving.
Yeah.
But but for that movie where you're locked in, right?
Yeah.
You're locked into whatever this guy's going through. And
Right.
there's one really like sharp cut in that movie.
That's right.
And if you've seen it, you probably know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And when that happens, you feel it.
Yep.
You
that's
feel
right.
it in a different way than if they hadn't tried to make it feel like it actually is many different shots that they cut together in a way that doesn't feel like it's cut together. But that's very particular, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
by doing that, it escalates your experience of the movie.
Yeah.
And so again, like obviously we want things that look beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
We want things that sound good.
Yeah.
We want things that make an impact on people with dramatic moments and all of these things. That is what we're looking for when we make a movie. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make people feel something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of those things, occasionally you sacrifice what's the prettiest thing for the thing that makes someone feel something.
Okay. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you have to have a movie. And so there are practical concerns, of course, in all of this, because making movies is a very practical thing as well. It genuinely is one of the hardest things that you can do because you're filming so much out of order. And I could wax poetic for a very long time about the movie making process and everything that I love about it. But yeah, so all of these decisions are then adding up to the parts of the movie.
Yeah.
That if the filmmakers do their job right, at the end of it, you feel something.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, your attention has been captured for 2.5 hours, 90 minutes, whatever it is, in a way that feels like you went through something.
Yeah.
That feels like you experienced something. That feels like you're different.
Yeah.
You know? And that's a dramatic way of putting it.
Yeah.
Like the goal is that you feel different after you watch a movie.
Yeah. It is drama.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so what I want us to think about as we're thinking about all this is, yes, what are like the story decisions being made? That's like one level. What are the story decisions being made? What is this saying about our culture and our world and our historical moment, but also just like generally, what does it say about people? What does it say about life? Does that agree with the gospel? Does it not agree with the gospel? But then also on another level thinking like, why is the camera there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why am I hearing that sound?
Yeah.
Why am I seeing this person's face instead of that person's face?
Yeah.
Because all of that is also going into shaping what we're thinking about the movie.
Yeah.
It's not just what's being said on screen.
Yeah.
So we're going to watch some movies.
Let's watch some movies. Popcorn ready.
So the criteria, I specifically didn't choose anything that was explicitly Christian.
Wait, no VeggieTales?
No VeggieTales.
Oh.
Specifically because I wanted us to be able to engage in that cultural conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted us to be able to number one, push ourselves out of the comfort zone a little bit and say, okay, maybe there's some stuff in here that I'm not going to agree with, and to really kind of wade into those waters a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, not every movie that says it's Christian is good, and maybe that's a conversation for another time. But
Fair.
I wanted to talk about good movies. So the other criteria that I had here was that I wanted to keep stuff released in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
Again, so that we're talking more about what's happening in our cultural moment, not necessarily what's happened in all of history. Because if we opened up that, then we could just talk about Citizen Kane and Casablanca forever and never get to what's actually happening right now.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of great movies. And if you
There's
want
some great
to know
movies.
some of my, if you're going to ask me about great movies, find me. I would love to talk about great movies.
Yeah. Yeah. John Wayne,
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood.
You're just listing movies that both of our wives hate. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love my wife.
So, we're going to be, I'm going to give you the list. Oh, this link will be in the show notes
Perfect.
as well. I don't know exactly what order we're doing things in because we are going to have a special guest. So some of that depends on their schedule.
Oh, yes, that's right.
But we're going to be talking about Dune, parts 1 and 2.
Parts 1 and 2.
Both are available streaming on Max.
That's
currently,
right. And
on VOD if you want to rent them.
And buckle up because they're both together are pretty long.
It's a long experience, but I think that it'll make sense when we talk about it. Why we should talk about both together.
That's right.
Barbie, last year's sensation. We will be talking about Barbie.
Oh.
Also available on Max.
Oh, man.
We'll be talking about Knives Out.
Okay.
It's a 2019 film starring Chris Evans and Ana de Armas and a bunch of other famous people.
A bunch of it, yeah.
Everything Everywhere All at Once. It won the Oscar in 2023 for the movies that were released in 2022, which is how the Oscars work.
Yep.
Won Best Picture and a bunch of other awards again. Really, really fascinating movie that I'm interested to, because you haven't seen it yet.
I don't think so.
We're talking about A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, which is the movie about Mr. Rogers. And I'll tag on to that. I would also recommend Won't You Be My Neighbor, the documentary about Fred Rogers. Both movies are quite good, but we'll be talking specifically about
That's right.
A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.
So get your cardigans ready.
And then we'll be talking about A Hidden Life, and that is a 2019 movie.
Okay.
By Terrence Malick, and we'll be digging in with that movie, also talking about artsy fartsy movies as well.
Fartsy
movies. What it means to watch art movies, how to approach those, the uber serious, maybe weird and a little uncomfortable kinds of movies.
That's right.
So just this next week for sure. We'll be talking about Dune.
Yeah.
Parts 1 and 2. And really, those are some of the highest grossing movies. That's why we're talking about those. Dune 2, up until recently, I think it's been beaten now, but up until recently, it was the highest grossing movie of 2024 for several months. So a lot of people have seen it. A lot of people have engaged with it. I think it's got a lot of interesting themes to
interesting
talk about.
Themes.
So I'm excited about that. There will be some resources in our show notes.
That's right. So get your popcorn ready. If you put things in your popcorn, you may be wrong, but we won't judge you for that. So that's right. Pull up a chair, people. Get ready to watch some movies. It's summertime. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
I'm excited. If you have questions, feedback, concerns, you can email keaton.paul@pcazion.org.
And I'll forward them to Seth.
They'll come to me. All right. See you next week.